Okay, well, I hope you guys can hear me. Uh, Welcome to South Pole, Antarctica, and my name's Michael Nyack. I'm a captain in the Air Force, working for the Air Force Research Lab. And let's see, the light's going to be a little bit weird here, but this is operating location, temporary operating location, South Pole. So let's see if I can share the screen here. What I'll do is I'll just go over briefly kind of the history of South Pole and the role, kind of why I'm here, and then just open up for any questions that you guys can type and let me know if you have any questions. So let me give me a moment here to share the screen with you. Okay, so welcome to the South Pole. I'm right in the center of the continent, 90 degrees south. It's actually right out of the window over there, and I'll take you guys over to it in a moment and show it to you. So this is the actual South Pole is right out of that window that you saw before, and where I'm talking to you from right now is this building here that's called Superdarn. And Superdarn is an experiment building, and it's about half a mile from the station, so it's a fairly long walk every day. But this is just a brief history of the station, where we are. So right now I'm at Amundsen Scott Research Station, which is right at the South Pole at 90 degrees south. And this man is the first guy to reach this spot, which is Roald Amundsen was his name. And he arrived here in the early 1900s. And this man, standing in the center there, is Robert Scott, and he was the second man to reach the South Pole. The two of these two were in a race, Amundsen and Scott, and Amundsen did win. However, you can imagine Scott's disappointment. Antarctica is an incredibly harsh continent. And so here's a picture of Scott and his men after they've done the 1,000-mile journey. They don't look very happy, and that's because as they arrived at the South Pole, they saw the tents of Amundsen, who had already come and gone. This is a picture of how they got there. It's a 1,000-mile trek just dragging sleds. Interesting fact, we still use sleds at South Pole today. This is a picture of the sled that I drag every day, about maybe half a kilometer out from this building where I am right now to my experiment site. Weighs about 250 pounds, and it's a fairly vigorous trek. So we're also at altitude here. We're at 9,300 feet above sea level, but effective altitude barometric pressure of 11 to 12,000 feet. So there's about a third less oxygen at this altitude than you guys are breathing right now. So this is quite a challenge. I got to experience firsthand how tough it must have been for Scott to drag those sleds 1,000 miles. And here's a picture of Amundsen just literally, gasping for breath at the South Pole, because it's pretty high up here. So anyway, that's the reason our station is named Amundsen Scott. It's for both those men. Amundsen made it first, but Scott did die on the way back. So our site remembers them both. This is kind of a picture of the next step in Antarctic evolution, which is the very first plane to land at the South Pole. It was 1956, and it was the U.S. Air Force and the U.S. Navy that did it. So it was a guy named Admiral Richard Byrd. He was the first man to land at the South Pole. He also overflew the North Pole. 1956, we landed the first plane, and here we are that very winter. The United States set up the first scientific station at the South Pole. So this is what it looked like during the first winter over. I believe there were 9 contractors and 9 Navy personnel that stayed here. And then this is what the station looks like today. This is where I live. This is what's in the distance. The South Pole is right there, so the U.S. has maintained a continuous presence here in Antarctica since 1957. Every winter, there has been someone to stay over. Last winter, we had 42 people. This winter, we'll have 41. And it'll be dark throughout that time. And that's the South Pole right there. Okay, so this is the ceremonial South Pole as it exists today, and that's kind of bringing me to the reason why I'm here, which is the Antarctic Treaty. So this is the ceremonial South Pole. The South Pole is actually moving by a couple of feet, 33 feet every year. The whole ice shelf is shifting. So this is where the South Pole was in 1960 when the U.S. and 11 other countries got together, signed the Antarctic Treaty. It's like the Outer Space Treaty. It basically says that Antarctica is a commons. And so there can be no military bases here. There can be no weapons here. The only purpose that Antarctica may be used for are twofold: scientific research and tourism. That's it. You can only come to Antarctica for scientific research or tourism. And so that's why even though I'm a part of the Air Force, that is how, per treaty, I am allowed to be here, because I'm conducting basic research for the Air Force Office of Scientific Research. And so that's a big part of the Antarctic Treaty. And this this is the actual South Pole, where it is today. It's maybe 2,000, maybe about 3/4 of a kilometer from where the ceremonial pole was. This is where it is today, and that's what's right out the window. These are all the countries that have participated in the Antarctic Treaty. And so any of these nations can come to Antarctica for scientific research purposes. You can set up a station, but you have to be doing science or research or something like that. And that's a little bit just about the history of Antarctica, how I'm here under the guise of the Antarctic Treaty, working on scientific research. So in the meantime, I just wanted to stop and see if there were any questions so far about life here. It's a pretty interesting place. It's fairly strange, but it's great. So if you guys have any questions, just type them out, and I'll be able to see them and answer them. But in the meantime, I'll give you a quick look back here. Let's give it a minute to resolve. There's a building in the distance that you can see there. That building is South Pole Station. It looks really small because it's half a mile away. And so I walk that distance every day. And right next to that station is the South Pole itself. This building that I'm in right now is called Superdarn. And I'll give you a quick look around while you guys are typing questions. So this is the experiment site. This is where we'll be when we come back next year. The project I'm working on is called LANDIT. And it's setting up an optical telescope here at the South Pole. And so we will be in this building next year as well. This is the Superdarn facility. It does not belong to us. It's a phased array radar that's making atmospheric measurements, and those are the antennas that are outside. We look out here. Way in the distance there, if you guys can see some wooden poles, that's where I have my instrumentation set up. It's a telescope, a small telescope to make atmospheric measurements, as well as 4 scintillometers that are measuring oscillations in the sun at very fast timescales so that we can measure what the atmospheric turbulence is. And that's pretty much the building. If I go out here, so this is the outside, and it's about negative 40 Fahrenheit right now. I've gotten a little bit used to it, which is why I'm out here in just my thermals. Those antennas that you see out there, those are the Superdarn antennas. Way in the distance over there, that's the runway, and that's where the C-130s come in. All the airlift that's done to South Pole is military airlift, under the guise of the Antarctic Treaty, of course, because they're just doing cargo. Everything is flown in here, from food to toilet paper. Everything here arrives and is scheduled, so it's a fairly large logistical footprint and enterprise. Okay, so now that we're sitting back here in the warmth at temporary operating location South Pole, let's answer a couple of questions we've got here. The first is, could you explain more about your work with LANDIT and what your research goals are? The second question is, did you bring a super soaker down with you to the South Pole? Okay, so let me answer the second question first. Unfortunately, no. However, when it gets colder here, so right now it's about, the ambient temperature is about negative 30 Celsius. Okay, so we're talking negative 40 Fahrenheit. With wind chill, it has gotten as cold as negative 77 here. But really, the fun starts at negative 80. So when it gets down to negative 80 Fahrenheit, you can start throwing water out, and it will freeze. So there's lots of fun things like that that you can do. All right, let me stop sharing this screen and share with you another screen, and I'll get to it in just a moment. And this is going to talk about Landit just a little bit. Okay, what do I do for fun? Let me show you a cool picture. So I did get to kite surf at the South Pole. There's some folks here that are very good kite surfers, and they, on a windy day, when the atmosphere is bad and the optical conditions are bad for imaging, well, you take a kite out, you grab a snowboard, and you go skiing. So that's the ceremonial South Pole and kite surfing. So that's one of the things that I've done here for fun. And there's plenty to do. It's a very tight community here. So we have game nights, we have movie nights. We watch The Thing, of course. It's an Antarctic tradition that you have to watch The Thing. But okay, so now going back to the first question, can we talk a little bit about Landit? Absolutely. So what I'm here is Landit is the Air Force Office of Scientific Research and National Science Foundation joint enterprise. So if you want to come to Antarctica under the guide to do research, you have to be part of the U.S. Antarctic program. By congressional and presidential order, the Antarctic program is administered by the National Science Foundation. So if you want to come to Antarctica for research purposes, it's the NSF that does that. So in May of 2018, the Secretary of the Air Force, Secot Wilson, and Dr. Cordova, who's the director of the NSF, signed a broad-level interagency agreement that basically said the Air Force and the National Science Foundation will work together on basic research. And they set out 4 categories in which you could work on that research together. One of those categories is space science and geosciences. And so that's what I'm here to do in the Antarctic program. And so I'll talk a little bit about Landit. I'm one of 2 principal investigators. The other principal investigator is Dr. Ryan Swindle, who's out of Amos in Maui with the Directed Energy Directorate. He's the lead engineer there. He will be down here next year. So in short, basically what Landit is trying to do is to use techniques from astroseismology. And what that means is I'll just go over the key points here. The idea comes from astroseismology and helioseismology, where the interior oscillations of planets basically tell you something. So there's changes in the brightness of the body, and the idea is that that is linked to physics that is happening within the body. Those oscillations in the brightness of the object are being caused by changes in the interior. There are waves that propagate through the interior, and maybe that medium can tell us something from an outside. So we're looking for outside expression, relate that to interior. So the Air Force Office of Scientific Research, this is still in the basic research phase, but we're interested in seeing, first we need to go to Jupiter and Saturn, and that's what the National Science Foundation is interested in as well, but we really need to refine the techniques. And then the hope is to extend that to satellites. So that's the short version of Landit, and I'd be happy to go into any more details that you guys would like if necessary. Okay, let's see. Let's go to we got a couple more questions coming in here. What was it like stepping foot on the continent for the first time? Good question. Let me see if I have a picture here that shows that. So getting to the pole is quite an interesting enterprise. It's all run by the U.S. Air Force for the National Science Foundation. And so I got to fly in. Hopefully you guys can see this picture here. This is a picture of me landing at the South Pole. It's a C-130, an LC-130, and it's called the LC because of the massive skis on it. And these guys are guard pilots from New York, from the New York Air National Guard. And so they fly down here. So setting foot on the continent for the first time, so you start in New Zealand, they issue you clothing, there's a passenger terminal that you go to, you check in just like a regular flight, fill out a departure card. I took a C-17 flight from Christchurch, New Zealand, which is the staging point, to McMurdo Station. We all crammed in there, flew over to Antarctica, got off the continent. There's cargo that's unloaded as well. I don't know if you guys can see this, but I thought this was a beautiful picture because there is a C-17, which is a massive airplane, in this picture. But all you can see is the bleakness of Antarctica. And And then we took a ride down the South Pole and stepped off the plane. It was -77. So to answer your question, I was extremely cold as I stepped foot off of the plane. But it's a beautiful station. Here's the passenger terminal. It's just a skied over crate to keep you warm for just a little while. But it's quite a privilege to be at 90 South. So it was a great journey. Cold is the short answer. Let's see. Antarctica has quite the history of UFO sightings. Have you seen any cool aliens? Unfortunately, the only aliens I've seen are people. The pole attracts a very interesting type of person, especially those who have wintered over. There's a language here, there's a community here, and it's just like anything else. It's different, and you learn it. So it's no real aliens, unfortunately. That's a good question. There are quite the urban legends about this place. That's certainly true. What did you do for Thanksgiving? Great question. People go all out for the holidays here. So everything is flown in. As you know, it's tough to get supplies here. People work really hard. The average work day is 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, and most people work more than that. It's cold outside. It's cold, windy, dry. You're at altitude. It's hard work, and you're always tired. And so it's really nice when the whole community comes together, and that's what happened at Thanksgiving. The cooks went out of their way to make a real feast. I mean, I would say it was one of the best Thanksgiving dinners I've ever had. And that's even though we're down here at the South Pole, and they're making everything from frozen food, and it was still amazing. So everybody gathered in the galley. There was drinks, there was meal time. Holidays are a big deal here. Folks got up in costume. So everybody goes out of their way just because we're kind of isolated here to come together and celebrate together as a big family. Air Force Materiel Command wants to know, have you met any penguins yet? And the answer is yes. I actually saw penguins in New Zealand while I was there, not the emperor penguins that folks are familiar with. Most of the penguins are on the coast. So the U.S. runs 3 stations in Antarctica, McMurdo, which is on the coast, Palmer, which is on the other coast, and South Pole Station. Palmer has a lot of penguins. I have not been there, but I got to go to McMurdo, and we saw in the distance, we saw penguins. Unfortunately, the Antarctic Treaty restricts interactions with penguins, so you actually can't get too close unless you're doing research. But yes, I did get to see some penguins. Let's see. What other questions do we have? Whitney wanted to know if you met any other exciting animals down there. So there's really just 3 types of wildlife here. There's penguins, there's seals, which eat penguins, and then there's skua. And skua is, I have 8 minutes here left, so let me answer as many questions as I can. So skua are these big predatory birds that basically swoop down and eat anything. So we see them at poles sometimes. I don't know why they come all the way down here. It's just miles of nothing. But I would say that, so we usually keep a sharp eye out for skua. So I've gotten to see all 3. The next question is, did you see yourself here when you started your career? The answer is absolutely not. I've wanted to come to Antarctica since I was a kid. It's been a lifelong dream. I certainly did not see myself coming here. What happened is that because I was trained as a planetary scientist and astrophysicist, I was familiar with helioseismology. Then when I came back to work for the Air Force Research Lab, I thought, well, maybe we can take some of the techniques that we have in astrophysics and apply them to what's called space situational awareness problems. And so that's basically what Landit is trying to do. Test out techniques on Jupiter and Saturn, and then try to apply those techniques in the future to satellites. So I did not see myself here when I started this career. It's certainly, I've been very lucky to have some good, strong support from my military chain of command to get here. What is the process to begin conducting research in and around Antarctica? This is a fantastic question, and I really want to try to answer this as clearly as possible. Again, because of treaty reasons, you must be here for basic research, right? So it depends on the type of research. You want it to be more basic in nature. Applied research is tougher because, again, this is an open community, right? This is an international community. No one owns this building. This is a U.S. station. but anyone from any country that has signed the Antarctic Treaty could walk right in here. Right? So the way to begin conducting research is the National Science Foundation. And it's great because right now, the Air Force and the NSF have an agreement in place to try and work together more on basic research. And so basically this trip is being half funded by the Air Force Office of Scientific Research, but my plane tickets, my stay here, all the logistics are paid for by the National Science Foundation under the Antarctic program. So right now there's a great opportunity for the Air Force and NSF to come and work together under the auspices of that agreement in Antarctica. Let's see. What are some of the urban legends or cool stories you've heard down on the base? There are so many amazing things about Pole. The first is the Traverse. It's 75,000 pounds of fuel comes in this long caravan of vehicles from McMurdo to the South Pole. And so the legend is that when they arrive, they basically have a surprise plan for station. They arrived later today, so we'll see. There's several legends about, winter overs, right? 6 months of darkness, 100 degrees below Fahrenheit, and 40 people together. So you can just imagine what isolation can do. There's some good stories and some horrifying stories. Cool stories. I mean, there's so many interesting things about living here. You're only allowed 4 minutes of showering per week because water's limited. There's a room because after a while there are no trees here. So after a while you start to forget what greenery smells like and looks like. So almost everybody has a picture of something green around them, and we have a greenhouse, so you can go in there and spend an hour and just smell what humidity and dirt smells like. So that's pretty interesting. Let's see here. Okay, got 4 minutes, so let me see how many other questions I can answer in that time. Let's see, question here. What are you going to do next down on the continent? Great question. So in 2019, so this time next year, Dr. Swindle, my co-PI, and I plan to come back and set up a permanent telescope here that'll be here for 1 or 2 years, and it's going to winter over. So our next real big objective is to try and get this telescope ready for negative 100 degrees Celsius. It's quite an engineering challenge. And so our next goal is, and it'll be right outside this building, we're going to set up a 25-foot tall tower, mount the telescope on top of it, and try to pull off the first ever 100-day continuous observing run on Jupiter. That's going to tell us something about how the interior of Jupiter operates, and the hope is that then, in the future, we can learn enough to translate that into something about satellites as well. Okay, I got time for, I think, one last question. So let me see if anything comes up. In the meantime, I'll say that, the people that are down here are amazing. The cooks and carpenters have advanced degrees. Everybody is here because they want to be here, and that makes for an amazing environment. People just come together and do what needs to be done, whatever that is. If it's, hey, we need to go out in the freezing cold and we need to dig a tunnel and look for power, then that's what we're going to do. And, whether it's a scientist or a support staff member, you just come together and work at a common goal. And I love that about this place. It's a harsh environment and everybody works together. Okay, final question. What impact do you see your research having in the long term? And I really hope that this is a great question and it's a good one to close on. I hope there's 2 impacts that come out of this. The first is I hope that there's more cooperation between the NSF and the Air Force in general. We tend to think of the NSF as the pure science folks and Air Force as the guys that build stuff that break things. But both organizations have a basic research mission, and both organizations have a national defense mission. So this is the first project in Antarctica where the NSF and the Air Force are shaking hands and working together.